So I have an exciting one for you guys today. It's going to be on the Dennis Had Inspire 300B amplifier. To be detailed and more specific, Dennis calls this the 300B-v amplifier. It's small, it's compact, it's a work of art. Dennis signs the bottom of each amp that he creates, and he builds it himself. It's his design, his creation. It's all hand wired by Dennis. Now, if you don't know who Dennis Had is, Dennis was the founder, the head honcho over at Cary Audio. Dennis is the guy responsible for amps' legendary, iconic tube amplification, like the 805C amps, the SLP 98P, the V12 series of amps. There's so many that I could just continue on. The SLI 80 integrated amp, the AES 6-packs, the Dennis J Had preamp by AES. There's so many products that Dennis has created over the years that are iconic, that I consider legendary pieces. They're beautiful, each and every one. But Dennis retired several years ago from Cary. He's no longer part of Cary Audio. Even though today Cary sells many of Dennis's designs, they still carry those iconic amps. You can buy them today. But Dennis in his retirement, has started creating little jewel-like amps, all mostly low wattage amps, so you're going to need sensitive speakers for amps from Dennis. They range anywhere from 2 watts per channel, I believe, up to 25 watts per channel, depending on the model. Now, there's no assembly line, there's no factory where these are being made. Dennis makes them in his shop, in his home. He auditions each piece before he ships it in his home. And the parts he uses are high quality. Again, I just can't get over how amazing this 300B amp looks in the design. He ships it with Western Electric tubes, Western Electric 300B tubes, which are currently in production again. And these tubes, if you buy them separately, they're $1,500 a pair. They do have a 5-year warranty, but Dennis designed this amp around that specific 300B tube and says that this amp will sound its best with that Western Electric, which is why he ships with that tube. The amp also uses a 6SL7, which Dennis shipped a new old stock tube with the amp, and it uses a rectifier, either a 5U4G, is it? Or a 5AR4, 5UG or 5AR4 tube. And I also received a General Electric new old stock tube for the rectifier. Now, this is an amp that is one of those that will really touch your heart. It's an amp that Dennis calls, and I agree with him, a lifetime amp. This is an amp you buy and you keep till the end of your days, as long as you have speakers that it can drive. Now, this amp puts out anywhere between, I believe, 6 and 8 watts per channel, depending on the rectifier tube you're using. And many of you may not be aware of this, but when we listen in our listening spaces, we generally tend to use between 1 and 4 watts of power. If you have one of those amps with a VU meter that shows you the wattage being used, you may see that you're using only a couple of watts when you're listening in your living room, in your space, right? So you really don't need a ton of power to listen to music in your home. I know that we get attracted to those 100 watts per channel, 200 watts per channel, 600 watts per channel amps. Sure, some speakers require big power. They require that current and that juice to take hold and control those drivers, right? But some speakers are sensitive. They're made to be driven easily. And some speakers, like my Fleetwood DeVille's back behind me, they are 94 decibel efficient, right? They're 8 ohm. That means you can use an amp, and Fleetwood says you need at least 10 watts of power to drive these speakers. Klipsch Heritage, for example, they are 99 dB efficient, 102 dB efficient, depending on the model you get. I believe the Heresy 4s are 98, 99 dB efficient. and this amp powers them to levels I've never heard before in regards to the quality of sound. Now, Dennis designed this amp, all of his creations. He makes a 2A3 amp, a 45 amp, a KT88 amp. He has made single-ended pentode amps, right, instead of single-ended triode amps. This is a single-ended triode amp. The 300B uses that magical 300B tube. And if you've never heard the 300B sound, depending on the amp you get, it can either be like, for example, the Wilsonton R300 that I just reviewed, a very powerful 300B amp for little money in the grand scheme of things. That amp has a big, warm, bassy sound, right? It has that tube magic, but it's more of a mid-range centric bass, little rolled off on the top kind of sound. The Dennis Had 300B amp has the traditional 300B sound, which is more transparent in the mids. You hear all the little details, but each sound, each instrument, each voice has an air around it. So that expansive sound stage can push into your room and you'll hear the drummer behind the singer. You'll hear the bassist to the right and slightly behind the singer, but you'll hear the details as well. Now, this amp is not thin or lean. It actually has that flesh and blood behind it, that meat on the bones. And that's another thing about 300B tubes. They have a bloom, a slight warmth about it. And the sound, to me, excels with vocals, jazz, chamber music even. This amp does great with all genres, but it's not a kick down the door, yell at you kind of amp. It is a gentle giant, right? So it sounds its best at low volume and medium volumes. You're not going to want to put on your heavy metal, turn it up to 10 and rock out. You can do that, but it's not going to give you that drive and kick when it's fully maxed out. The 300B tube is really meant for that seductive, suck you into the music sound, like you're sitting on your listening seat, right, with a glass of your favorite beverage, and you have the lights down, and maybe you have some accent lighting around your system, and you want to hear those sweet voices in the room with you. The 300B tube excels at that, and the Dennis Had amp really delivers the 300B sound. I said in my written review of the Dennis Had amp, if the Wilsonton gives you a big taste of 300B, the Inspire 300B-v is the definition of what a 300B amp will sound like. Now, this is a little jewel of an amp. As I said, Dennis even signs the bottom of them before he ships them out. They are kind of a rarity because you just can't go to a website and buy one. You have to either wait for Dennis to list one on his eBay page, or you can contact him and see if he will build you one, a custom order. I have heard that he has made custom amps and custom configurations for people. If you want to pay for it, I'm sure Dennis can create it for you if he has the time and desire to do it. He is in his retirement, remember that. So he does this out of a passion and love for creating amps. He's been doing this, I think, for what do you say, over 50 years. That's pretty remarkable. So let's take a little bit of a closer look at the 300B amp by Dennis Had. This is an Inspire 300B set. This is a single-ended triode amp. Look at this beautiful paint job here, right? It's an automotive quality finish, and it is just stunning in the flesh. I don't know how much of that conveys in the video. I have my blinds or shades open so I can get some light in here to show you guys this. These are the Western Electric tubes, which do come in the wooden box right here. They come in the full wooden box. Dennis ships the amp with these tubes. These are the best 300B tubes you can buy, in my opinion, and Dennis designed this amp around this specific tube. This is a new old stock Sylvania 6SL7. He shipped that with the amp, and a new old stock General Electric rectifier that he shipped with the amp. Now, I use the volume control direct from my DCS Lena DAC, which is down here. I have the output set to 6 volts. You can change the output voltage on this DAC, but this going direct sounds its best with that 6-volt output. It does not clip the input at all. Now, I did try this with a Dennis had created or designed the IHA1. It's a headphone amp and a preamp that Moon Audio sells. It's called the Dragon Inspire IHA1. And I wanted to see what one of those preamps would do to the sound. Unfortunately, using that 6-volt output clipped the input of the IHA1, so I had to lower the output to 2 volts, but then I wasn't getting the volume. It also kind of darkened up the sound. I much preferred it going direct from the DAC to this to my Fleetwood DeVilles. Now, using the built-in volume control, I mainly listen at midday. My highest volumes is around 11 a.m. on the volume dial. If I want to go louder, I'll go up to noon. It sounds so good at these volumes as well. At late night, I usually go down to around 9, 10 a.m. and I get plenty of volume, plenty of body to the sound. It is just such a gorgeous, gorgeous sound. You don't have to listen to music at ear-splitting volumes to enjoy it. There's so much subtlety when you listen at a lower to medium volume. And when I say medium, it's still plenty loud for me. I wouldn't want it any louder. I don't listen at crazy loud levels. So you don't have to run this amp at low volume. I don't want to, make it sound like I'm saying that, because I'm not. It's very loud in this room when it's at 11 a.m. and rarely would I go to noon. So there is power behind this amp. The bass is tight, right? It's not that big woolly loose bass. It's a tight bass. And on 2 occasions, I did feel the vibration in my couch. So depending on the recording, what's in the recording, this amp will deliver it to you. The highs are very extended but sweet and silky. The mids, though, is where the magic lie, and the imaging performance of this amp is spectacular. This is a magic amp through and through. And I would say that this amp delivers full magic, right? Where the Wilson tin gave you some of that magic, this gives you all of the magic. So this is an absolute work of art amp. It looks like a work of art. It ships with premium tubes. You don't have to be changing out the tubes unless you want to. You can try different 6 SL7s. Mine shipped with a Sylvania. I did buy a Tung Sol black glass, new old stock, but the one Dennis shipped with it sounds better. I did buy a few rectifiers. The one Dennis shipped with it sounds the best, even though it has a little rattle going on. But it doesn't really bother me. These old tubes can be a little finicky, but they do tend to sound the best. I've also tried some new production tubes, and again, those new old stock just seem to have that beauty about it, and I don't know what it is. And they also are said to last much longer, these new old stocks, because as you always heard the term, they don't make them like they used to. Now, I said earlier, this is a lifetime amp. Now, if you have speakers that are compatible with this amp, this is an absolute amp you will want to keep for the rest of your life. The amp is not crazy expensive, but it's not super inexpensive. I will say that Luxman sells an 8 watt per channel 300B amplifier, and it's over $20,000. The one Dennis sells comes with those Western Electric tubes, and he sells it for $39.95. And you're getting a handmade creation by a legend in audio. It's pretty cool what he's doing with these Inspire amps. There's many people who own an Inspire amp of some kind. Now, Dennis also makes custom preamps that look really, really cool, that are designed to go with his Inspire amps. I will tell you that I can tell this amp was voiced by Dennis Had. It has a similar sort of house sound to that old 300 SCI, but I would say this is even better. It's more transparent. It's more sophisticated. It's more refined. I know for a fact that it sounds its best with super high sensitivity speakers. The Klipsch Heresy 4 I have here, this thing made those Heresy 4s sound better than I've ever heard them. They were actually doing imaging better than I've ever heard. The sound stage everything just sounded so good, and the bass was beautiful. I did try them with Klipsch La Scala AL5s. As a matter of fact, I just sold those. I had to sell them due to space reasons, but I sold them to a viewer here who picked them up locally, and he's now enjoying them in his space. But I tried this amp before I delivered those speakers to him, and um, it sounded so good with the La Scalas. And he already had put a deposit down, and I remember listening at night saying, why did I sell these La Scalas? It was almost a better match for those than the DeVilles. So I always have amps coming in and out of here. I don't know if I will keep this for life, because there are times I do like to throw on some metal and jam out. But at the same time, I feel that one day these amps will almost be sought after and collectibles because of the way they're made by Dennis. You know, his design, his creation, his build, his doing, his signature. It's a very special piece. So that is why this is a lifetime amp. Just find the right speakers for it and you are golden. So one of the best amps I've heard in my life, actually. Again, if you pair it with the right speakers. Beautiful, beautiful with the DeVilles. I have no complaints. Beautiful with Klipsch Heritage. I have zero complaints there. So if you have similar speakers and you want that 300B sound that you've heard about and maybe you haven't experienced it fully yet, I can highly recommend the Dennis had 300B-v, the Inspire. So I hope you enjoyed my thoughts on this amp. It's a beauty. It's a keeper. I will have a new review soon. I will see you guys next time.